Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
Hillary Clinton wants to abolish it, believe me. She wants to abolish our Second Amendment.
I think they didn't deny it. I don't think anybody denied it.
Other presidents did not call. They'd write letters, and some presidents didn't do anything.
Many people have come out and said I'm right.
You really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Fallacious Trump, the podcast where we use the insane ramblings of a tiny-handed narcissist to explain logical fallacies. I'm your host, Jim.
And I'm your other host, Mark. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that results in bad or invalid arguments. And the logical fallacy we're looking at this week is the genetic fallacy.
The genetic fallacy is basically where instead of evaluating the truth of a claim based on the claim itself, you base it on where the claim is coming from.
All right, so nothing to do with genes.
It's nothing to do with genetics except for the etymology of that word, because it comes from Genesis, basically. It's the same root as Genesis, meaning beginnings or origins. So it's when we look at a claim or an argument and ignore the argument itself, what we're looking at is something which is actually not relevant to the argument. It's where the who is saying it, where the initial idea comes from, or in fact sometimes where the person comes from who's saying the argument. Trump is, as we will learn over the course of this podcast, very keen on the odd logical fallacy, which is the whole point of this.
This judge is giving us unfair rulings. Now I say why. Well, I'm building a wall, okay? And it's a wall between Mexico, not another country.
But he's not from Mexico.
In my opinion,
he's from Indiana.
He's Mexican heritage, and he's very proud of it.
So this is from a CNN interview with Jake Tapper, where Trump was talking about the class action lawsuit against Trump University. And the judge in the case, Judge Gonzalo Curiel, as Jake Tapper says, is not from Mexico. He's from Indiana. But because he's of Mexican heritage, Trump decides that all of the negative rulings that they're getting in the case are actually nothing to do with the evidence, nothing to do with the arguments that the lawyers make. It's because his family is from Mexico.
But isn't the implication that it's because Trump's building the wall that the judge is, because he's Mexican and the wall is being built between the US and Mexico, that therefore the judge is biased in his rulings because he is Mexican?
Yeah, that's right. It's the...
Yeah. Even though he isn't.
He is of Mexican heritage.
And he's very proud of it.
He's very proud of it. So, as far as Trump is concerned, or at least as far as he's arguing, that's enough. The fact that there would be animus there because of the wall and because Trump has basically pissed off all the Mexicans, that is the explanation for the arguments that the judge is making, the claims, and the rulings that he's making. Obviously, that's probably an oversimplification of the case as a whole.
And also just a little bit racist.
It is, a little bit racist. There's an element of the genetic fallacy in racism where it is used to disparage what people are saying. Yeah, it's about the source. It's about looking at who is saying it, where they're from sometimes, and dismissing the argument based solely on that. And the genetic fallacy it's a group of fallacies. It's a type of fallacy, and one very common type of fallacy that falls under the umbrella of the genetic fallacy is called an ad hominem fallacy, which is basically where you argue against the man. Ad hominem means Latin for to the man, rather than arguing against the argument.
Right. So the source of the argument is the centre of your dismissal of it. So the source might not be a person, it might be something else.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that right?
So, cool. A source might be the reason for the argument coming up in the first place. Like, for example, if you were to suggest that because someone came up with something in a dream, what they came up with is obviously wrong, because the dream is where it originated from. It's the source of the thought or the argument.
So Trump is making the assumption that because this guy is of Mexican heritage, which he's very proud of, then therefore his judgments are somewhat flawed. It's not a genetic fallacy to base the assumption that the rulings are fair on the fact that the judge has had to go through judge school and deploy the full weight of the law in an impartial fashion. That isn't a genetic fallacy.
It would be
referring to an expert.
Well, yeah. It would be a fallacy if we said that because he's a judge, his rulings are definitely fair. If we were being absolute about it. And that does seem to be the argument that Trump is making in the other direction, is that they're having unfair rulings, in his opinion, and that's because he's from Mexico. Well, even though he's not. It's about the difference between being a kind of a good critical thinker, being a good skeptic, and what we're often told to do, which is consider the source, and comparing that to actually relying on the source and saying that due to the source you can make a decision on whether the argument that's being made is true or false. Yeah. You can't often do that, but it is one of the things you should factor in if you want to think critically about whether an argument is probably right or not. So, for example, if we have a tweet from Trump in June of 2017 about CNN, he says, and I'm going to do the voice, we'll see.
Okay.
Fake news CNN is looking at big management changes now that they've got caught falsely pushing their phony Russian stories. Ratings way down.
That was all right. That was rather good.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I've been practicing. So 20 minutes later, CNN tweeted back, CNN just posted its most watched second quarter in history. Those are the facts. So we have to then make a judgment on who's telling the truth, because those two tweets directly contradict each other. Donald Trump says the ratings are way down for CNN because of their phony Russian stories. CNN says they're the highest ratings they've ever had. So they've both got a motivation to lie. Donald Trump hates CNN, and obviously he wants to discredit anyone who's saying bad things about him. CNN, obviously they want to be trusted by the American people and seen as a responsible news source. The thing is that CNN can support their argument with data from Nielsen, which is an independent, well-respected organization that has recognized expertise in evaluating ratings. That's what they do. That's what they're set up to. They don't have a reason to lie. And
exactly. They have no knife to grind, do they? Yeah.
Exactly. And Nielsen supports CNN's argument. They say that yes, they did have the highest ratings that they've ever had. So we can look at that. We can make an assumption based on who's saying it, but that's not really good logic. That's not something that's going to get us always in the right area.
Yeah, because there's always a feeling, there's a sense that there's an objective truth that's being diverted from. When you deploy the genetic fallacy, what you're doing is you're kind of bringing in some smoke and mirrors, and you're diverting people from the actual objective truth. So in saying, when he does they're the lowest rating because they've been pushing their Russian phony stories, well, you can go and check. You can go and look these things up.
I mean, there are times when you can check the facts, and there are times when it's opinion. You know, whether Judge Curiel's rulings are based on the law is something that a lawyer could look at the court transcripts and have a good guess at whether they are supported and whether they are actually reasonable and the kinds of rulings that an impartial judge might make. But it's not quite as fact based as something like ratings. If we have another example, another tweet from Trump, this time in 2013, he said, "The people that gave you global warming are the same people that gave you Obamacare."
Right.
That's typically with no context around there. It's kind of hard to say whether he's disparaging in this particular tweet global warming or Obamacare, but it doesn't really matter for our purposes. Let's say, for example, that this is a tweet against global warming. What he's saying is that the people, it's so hard to pass this, but the people that gave you Obamacare, i.e. presumably the Obama administration, are the same people that are saying that global warming is real. And since Obamacare is such an awful thing, they're obviously wrong about this as well.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
And he is basically asking you to kind of join in with him in his hatred.
Because what he's doing, because what he's doing is comparing two of his own opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. He's saying that look at Obamacare, they can't be trusted to do good things, and they gave you global warming. Now, I mean, you have to ignore 70 plus years of climate science to believe that the Obama administration gave you global warming.
Invented it.
Only even
less than 4 years ago.
What he means is they're the ones telling you it's real. The fact that they also gave millions of Americans healthcare who didn't have it before isn't really relevant to whether global warming is real or not.
Yes, exactly. In order for you to get what he's even saying, you've got to buy into that one or other of those is a bad thing.
Well, yeah.
And therefore, and the fact that because the Obama administration brought you one of these bad things, then the other thing is also bad.
Yes. But crucially, even if it was bad, even if he actually mentioned a bad thing, that wouldn't prove that the other thing he's mentioning is also bad. That if we said, look, okay, Gina Haspel, new director of the CIA, ran a black site where they tortured Al-Qaeda prisoners. That's to almost everyone objectively bad. That doesn't mean that everything she does is bad or everything she's going to do moving forward. It's a reason to maybe not make her head of the CIA, arguably, but it's not an indication that whatever the next decision she makes as head of the CIA will also be immoral and evil. What it is, and this is where considering the source comes in, is one of the things that you can factor in. And where it becomes fallacious is where the importance of that information about the source is irrelevant to the matter at hand. So with that example of global warming and Obamacare, no matter how bad Obamacare was in your opinion, it's completely irrelevant to whether global warming is real. So that is a genuinely fallacious statement. There's no logical thread between those two things. The Judge Curiel example, if you believe that his Mexican heritage made him possibly biased, then it's not completely unreasonable to say that if there were unfair rulings, that could be due to bias against Trump because of the war. It's not 100% unfair. It's a stretch, and there's a lot of things that you need to consider outside of it that make it probably not the reason. But it's closer to being fair and logical. It's not logical still because of the reasons that we've already talked about. But this is one of those slightly more nuanced fallacies where there are times where you can appear to be committing a fallacy, but actually what you're doing is thinking critically and considering the facts.
Thinking critically requires you to look at all the things that we've just been talking about. Like, as a judge, it ought to be possible for another judge to see whether his rulings have been, have followed precedent. And the thing about making a ruling is that it's an opinion, but it's based on your legal training and precedents that are set before. So that's the critical thinking, is to stop and think, well, hang on a minute, it ought to be possible to test that. Is it not more likely that this is the kind of thing that Trump would do in all of Trump's activities, he tends to reveal a lot about how Trump does business. So he would do exactly that. It seems to me that that's where it's coming from. So whilst we can see that it's not an out and out genetic fallacy like the Obamacare global warming one, which is just a logical step too far. This one has a logical step, but if it's true, this would require, there'll be an outcry in the judicial service to say, blimey, we need to go investigate that, Judge. Then.
Yeah, and there's a process as well in legal system where you would be able to appeal a decision and claim that the judge was partisan, and that could be looked into. It's
and does that system not involve going on CNN?
The system of appeal? No, not usually. Oddly,
of appeal, no. Oh, doesn't it? Oh, okay, right.
You may ask why I would choose such a nuanced logical fallacy for our first episode, as opposed to a.
Oh, I am asking that. Well, that's a good question to ask.
Yeah, because I could have started off with a very, very clear one where it's obvious when it's happening and when it isn't. And the reason I wanted to start with the genetic fallacy is because if there are any Americans listening to this, which let's hope at some point there are, they may think, what are these two Brits talking about our president for? And that's a reasonable thing to think.
And what gives us the right?
Yeah, what gives us the right to talk about their president and say bad things about him? Because we're going to say bad things about him. And over the course of...
Are we saying bad things? Are we saying bad things?
Yeah.
I think we're questioning some of his things, not necessarily saying bad things about him.
Well...
Questioning some of his,
let's wait and see.
His motives.
But over the course of this podcast, we are going to try and talk about a lot of the things that the logical mistakes that he makes, which are, the reason we're talking about it is that they are logical mistakes that lots of people make, and mistakes that it's easy to fall victim to, and sometimes even commit yourself. And so we're not really, well, we are totally picking on Trump. I was going to say we're not really picking on Trump, but we definitely are. It's the name of the show. But it's okay to do that, because what we're arguing against is the lack of logic. We are, however, going to be expressing our opinion as well. And our opinion is often going to be counter to Trump's opinion, simply because of the way we think, and that's okay, because we're people and we get to have our opinion as well. So here's the point where it becomes relevant to the genetic fallacy, is if you are an American and you have a problem with us giving our opinion because we're British, that's fine. That's your opinion, dude, and you're entitled to it too. But if you at any point were to suggest that the arguments we're making are not valid because we're British, and therefore we don't know what we're talking about, then you're committing the genetic fallacy. So I would say listen to the arguments we're making and determine for yourself whether you think they're logical ones, and that is how you can decide whether you agree with us or not, rather than dismissing us because we're British.
And if you think we've committed a fallacy in the process of talking about these fallacies, feel free to point that out.
Please do, yeah. And we will argue with you about it, I'm sure.
And now is the time, I think, for Mark's British Politics Corner.
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Boris. Okay, so here's my little scenario for you, Jim. Someone in your neighbourhood has had a window smashed. There's broken glass and everything. But in your neighbourhood, there's one guy who's trying to get somebody else in the neighbourhood into trouble.
Okay.
He wants him to be blamed for the breaking of the window. So he said to you, yeah, you know that guy? We've suspected him of things before. Well, it's got to be him. It's obvious. Look no further. There's no need to investigate. I'm sure you'll agree. And that's basically, you'd kind of go, all right, yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. So my example of that actually happening in real life at the hand of our Boris himself is on an interview that he did on the 18th of March this year on the Andrew Marr Show, and he's talking about the Skripal incident with the two Skripals, the father and daughter, who were ostensibly poisoned by a nerve agent, which was then traced to be a nerve agent from the Novichok family, which was then announced to be the kind of nerve agent that, I think the phrase they used was, of a Russian source, or of Russian origin. So on the Andrew Marr Show, he actually says the following.
People have all now experienced, whether it's in America, Germany, France, say nothing of the Baltic countries, the Balkans and Poland, they've all experienced Russian meddling, malign, disruptive Russian behavior over the last few years. They can see a country that is going in the wrong direction. And that's why they're so inclined now to not to give Russia the benefit of the doubt and to stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK.
So what he's saying is it's the Russians that broke the window, because we've all had the experience of meddling from the Russians. Therefore, it's got to be the Russians.
Yeah, it's so basically you can't trust them Ruskies. So
you can't trust them.
They probably did this too.
And yeah, and he's also saying that because we know we can't trust the Ruskies because we've experienced malign meddling. You know, I don't know what that is. And we don't know who those people are, but they're the people who are now less inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, and therefore they're standing shoulder to shoulder with the UK. Many of those things are unverifiable.
And in a way, he's saying that it's kind of stupid of Corbyn at the time that this was going on to be saying maybe we should just look into it and see if it's the Russians before jumping to conclusions, isn't it?
Exactly. Just hang on. Let's not be so hasty. Let's find out whether there is a real truth behind this. This is going back to the objective truth that might exist behind it. You know, what Corbyn is appealing to is whether we can find somebody like the Nielsen ratings people to say, well, yeah, here are the facts. What Boris is not saying, he's not saying, let's find out what the facts are and let's see whether it was the Russians. That's what Corbyn's saying, which doesn't seem unreasonable to me. Because you know, going back to our smashed window example, if somebody came up and said, well, yeah, you know that guy that we've always suspected of being a bit dodgy, well, he's the one that's most likely to have smashed this window. And the first question you'd want to ask him is, what makes you so sure? Just because he did it last time, actually, you're saying he did it last time. So there's so many
the thing is, I mean, even
away from the reality.
Even if he definitely did do it last time, it may be that it makes him a reasonable suspect. It may be even that in the absence of any other reasonable suspects in the area, it makes it likely that he probably did it. But what you can't do is say that means he did it. And I mean, this is exactly why you can't introduce evidence of past crimes in court cases, because although if it shows a pattern of previous behaviour, it could be evidence, at least, not proof, that the person is more likely to be the one who committed the crime. It's massively prejudicial, because any jury that hears that this person who's sitting in the defendant's chair did this kind of crime in the past, the jury will be much more likely to assume that he was responsible for this crime that they're talking about now, and that isn't necessarily true. It's not logical to say that. It's a higher probability, perhaps, but it would be so much more likely to result in unfair convictions that's why they're not allowed to do it. We are hardwired to look for patterns in things and use them as heuristics rather than doing the difficult thinking. And actually searching around to find the real truth, because it's much easier. It takes a lot less brain space and a lot less energy to to use stereotypes, to use quick answers that are likely to be true. And it gets us most of the way there a lot of the time. And the thing is here, it may be very, very, very likely that it's the Russians that did it. That may be the case. And you know, I'm not going to say that it wasn't them. I'm not going to say that it was them, absolutely. But it's from the little that I know of it, it seems likely. But what we're talking about is the logic of whether you can say, whether you can stop looking, whether you can just make a decision that you have come to a conclusion already. And there isn't a logical, there isn't a thread that joins directly between those thoughts, between those pieces of evidence.
No, you'd want to, and which is what Corbyn was saying and was vilified in the press. I think he was called, he was Sajid Javid, who's a marvellously named, well, he's now the new Home Secretary in the UK. He says Corbyn has let the British people down by asking questions.
Yeah.
You know, so well, my bit is the by asking questions, but fundamentally, Corbyn is saying, well, hang on a minute, what you're doing there is making logical leaps between bits of assumptions. What I'm saying is, let's go and look at the evidence. It may well be that the evidence points to the Russians.
There's a stark difference there as well between what Corbyn was doing and what Trump was doing, when he was still claiming that Putin said he didn't do anything to interfere with the election, and then and Trump believed him, because why not?
Yeah,
But Trump was not at that point saying, well, yes, maybe it's the Russians. We need to look into it. We need to be investigating it and check out what we can find out. What he was doing was deflecting largely. And saying, Putin's told me it wasn't them, so it wasn't them, as far as I'm concerned. Which is quite different, really, because Corbyn has not, I don't think, said it's not the Russians, or he doesn't think it's the Russians, or he doesn't see any reason to believe it's the Russians. He has, I think, from what I've seen, only said, let's not jump to that conclusion without looking into it.
Exactly. I think what he's doing is, he's cautioning that we shouldn't do anything hasty until we find out.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to look at some examples of the fallacy in the wild. Mark, I believe you've been working on a sting for this.
Yeah, here it is. And here we are, witnessing the fallacy in the wild. Rawr.
Okay.
I think we'd
nailed it, definitely. You're going to do that live every week?
It'll get better every week.
Okay, cool. So, politics isn't the only place to find logical fallacies. So we're going to try each episode to find examples that are outside of politics. Sometimes it might be religion, for example. Sometimes it will be pop culture.
Kyle just told me some really bad stuff about her.
Like what?
Like she's really mean and she's overly critical and no, she will paint a room a really bright color without even checking with you.
Okay.
And she uses sex as a weapon.
Fine, thank you for warning me. At breakfast, I'll be on full alert for room painting and sex weapons.
You're still gonna go out with her?
Yeah.
Well, didn't you hear what I just said?
Phoebes, come on. I mean, consider the source. Of course her ex-husband's going to say that stuff.
So Ross, who is a scientist, actually uses the phrase there, consider the source. And what he's doing is considering that because the person who is saying all of this stuff about this woman that he wants to date is her ex-husband, therefore it's not true. Because he would say that. Of course her ex-husband is going to say stuff like that. This is one of those nuanced parts of the genetic fallacy. That's a reasonable argument. The place where it becomes a fallacy is assuming that information is false. If you can say that we can't necessarily trust the information. We can't assume it's true. But in assuming it's false, you're committing the genetic fallacy. And Ross was absolutely still happy to go out with this presumably very attractive woman because he assumed that everything that was negative that was being said about her was not true because it was coming from her ex-husband.
Which actually, because it's a comedy, it's a comedic device to do that as well. So he actually commits the fallacy of believing it's all to be false, which sets him up to actually be on the receiving end of some of this stuff later on. So he's warning against committing the logical fallacy of believing it's to be true, but he's committing the logical fallacy of dismissing it all as false, based on the same thing.
Yeah, and in this episode, in fact, Phoebe is dating the ex-husband, and so she is assuming all of this stuff is true because it's coming from him, and she's dating him, she fancies him. So she's doing the exact same thing in the opposite direction. And this kind of specific kind of genetic fallacy where the argument is that someone has a motivation to say negative things or to make a particular argument, and because of their motivation we can dismiss the argument is a particular kind of ad hominem fallacy. Actually, it's called ad hominem circumstantial. But that ad hominem fallacies only work when you are assuming something is not true because of the kind of person that it comes from. Where you assume that something is true, then that's actually specifically a genetic fallacy. That doesn't fall under the ad hominem. There's an example here from South Park which covers that off nicely.
You see, guys, this is why Jews can't be ninjas. They've got no spine. You don't know anything about Jews, fat ass? Oh, yeah? My mom took me to see Mel Gibson's movie The Passion, and Mel Gibson says you are snakes and you are liars. And if the Road Warrior says it, it must be true.
So,
it must be true.
If the Road Warrior says it, it must be true. So, and this is pretty good example of the genetic fallacy, really, because it is a positive thing. Cartman is saying that it's true. He can assume that Jews are snakes and liars because Mel Gibson says so, and that's great. And also, it covers what we talked about before, where it becomes a fallacy. The more irrelevant the kind of authority, if you like, of the source is to the argument. The fact that the Road Warrior says it has really nothing to do with the moral makeup of the Jewish people.
Which is what, and that's the source of the comedy.
Irrelevant. So there's
this massive juxtaposition between
absolutely,
the history of opinions held against the Jewish people and the Road Warrior.
So we're gonna play
Fake news, folks. I love the game. It's a great game.
I understand the game as well as anybody. As well as anybody.
Okay, so this is a game in which I read 3 Trump quotes, 2 of which are real and 1 I made up, and Mark has to figure out which one is fake news.
Yeah.
So, is it number 1?
Right.
I'm not going to do the voice for all of these because it's very tiring.
Oh, okay, thank God for that. How does he keep it up after all this time? Yeah.
I don't know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Number 1. You know, I was saying it the other day, because we're doing a tremendous amount of work in space. I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it Space Force. And I was not really serious. Then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that. Or, is it number 2? Before I was president, I had a lot more time on my hands, which, by the way, are not small. They're totally normal. If anything, a little bigger than average. And I've never had any complaints, if you know what I mean. Believe me. Or, is it 3? Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago. The power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what was going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought? But when you look at what's going on with the 4 prisoners, now it used to be 3, now it's 4. But when it was 3, and even now, I would have said it's all in the messenger. Fellas, and it is fellas, because, you know, they haven't figured out that the women are smarter right now than the men. So, you know, it's going to take them about another 150 years. But the Persians are great negotiators.
Well, all right, yeah. So the first one, the Space Force, it sounds like something that you would write, I think he said that one. The second one I know for sure he said that because I've heard it. The third one, though there are massive amounts of leaping around like he does do, I think the nuclear leap over to Korea and the hostages and then off to Syria and then women and then Syria, I think that's too many things, so that's why I think it's 3.
Okay, so you're confident that number 1 is something that Trump said?
Yeah.
Okay, let's play this.
You know, I was saying it the other day because we're doing a tremendous amount of work in space. I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. And I was not really serious. And then I said, what a great idea. Maybe we'll have to do that.
He did say that. And
yes.
Oh, my God. Space Force.
No.
Space Force.
Space Force.
Yeah.
He's just been watching the TV all his life, hasn't he?
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
So
everything he does is based on TV.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
He did say number 1. That was great. And you think number 2 is real?
I think number 2 is real because he's even bragging about how average his hands are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're tremendously, they're astonishingly average.
I have to tell you, I made that up.
Oh, no! Wow! Bloody hell, well done. God, that is so good.
The third one, however, is real.
No.
Nuclear is so powerful. My uncle explained that to me many, many years ago, the power, and that was 35 years ago. He would explain the power of what's going to happen, and he was right. Who would have thought? But when you look at what's going on with the 4 prisoners, now it used to be 3, now it's 4. But when it was 3, and even now, I would have said it's all in the messenger. Fellas, and it is fellas because, they haven't figured that the women are smarter right now than the men, so, it's going to take them about another 150 years. But the Persians are great negotiators.
I haven't edited that at all, I swear.
Wow, that is just brilliant, isn't it?
And I have to say
God,
is just a section of a longer rambling speech that he gave. It goes on for kind of 2 or 3 minutes like that, just leaping from place to place. Like he's on something.
Just things are light in his head, and then he goes, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea," and then he adds another little sentence to that.
Yeah, he's like the dog from Up. That's what it is. He's easily distracted. Awesome. So I am now undefeated at fake news.
No,
that's very exciting.
I can't believe that. That second one is very well written. Then I mean, the third one, I'm going to have to look out for your deviousness a bit more because anything that's scattery and nuts, it's going to be true, isn't it?
Well, yeah, probably. And I'm going to get some help. So podcast listeners, I need your help to full mark on a regular basis. So if you think that you can make up a convincing fake Trump quote, then share this episode on Twitter, include your quote and the hashtag Fallacious Trump, and I'll pick the best one, and you'll be podcast famous. Okay, so it's time for the section of the show that this week is called Leaking is Not a Logical Fallacy. This is where we talk about some of the crazy shit that's been going on in the White House, and we can't talk about everything. We don't have time. There's so much. It's seriously, even trying to talk about the crazy shit that happens in a day in the White House, we would run out of time. So we have to pick something to talk about, and the story that I want to talk about this week is the leaks, which are an ongoing problem in the White House. It's quite amazing, the number of leaks that are coming out. And there was one particular leak that happened a couple of weeks ago almost, where in a meeting of White House aides, they were talking about the confirmation of Gina Haspel, the CIA director. And someone talked about how John McCain was against it because he has been tortured and he knows what it's like, and he has spoken out against Gina Haspel's views on torture and her inability, when questioned by the Senate, to come out against torture and to call it immoral. And an aide called Kelly Sadler made a joke. She said that it didn't matter what McCain thinks because he's dying anyway. So now the White House, this is almost 2 weeks ago, the White House have still not apologised for this. And they don't seem particularly upset that it was said. What they are very upset about, though, is that it was leaked.
Yeah.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders...
Which is by far a more heinous crime.
Oh, absolutely. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was absolutely incensed about this, apparently. And she called the entire White House communications team together and had a meeting about it and told them how upset she was, how furious she was. She said, "I'm sure this conversation is going to leak too, and that's just disgusting," according to a source in the room. And the brilliant thing about this is that there was an article in Axios about this, and it says, Sanders' prediction came true, obviously. What follows below is a leak from that very intense meeting yesterday, according to 5 sources in the room.
Well, that's not a leak then. That's not a private meeting. That's a press conference.
This is the entire White House Communications Department consists of about 24 people.
Right. So
this is 1/5 of all the people who were in that room are talking to Axios about it.
That's brilliant. But so, what if 1/5 talking to Axios? Who are the other 4/5 talking to?
The first reporting of this was on ABC.
Right.
But then the fact that literally a fifth of all the people in the meeting were talking to journalists pretty much immediately after the meeting.
Wow.
Is absolutely amazing. And the thing about this,
they might as well just do it in the open air.
Yeah,
they
practically are.
Meetings.
They almost are. It's oh my God, it's amazing. But the thing about this is, if you want to avoid people leaking stuff you're talking about, you have to be a good leader. You have to be someone that inspires loyalty in people. If you are insane and evil and do things that people in the room think, "Oh my God, I have to tell someone about this," that's how this happens.
And just going back to the actual note about, well, it doesn't matter what you're saying, he's dying anyway. Well, we all are. So we can dismiss anything that anybody says.
Trump has, in fact, just in the last couple of days, he has supported Kelly Sadler and said that it wasn't a joke. She was just stating facts. So that's okay.
Okay. What? Yeah. So it's a fact that it doesn't matter.
He is dying, so it doesn't matter. That's what I take it to mean.
Fact.
That's what he said. Yeah.
What?
Anyway, Gina Hasper's been confirmed now, so it literally doesn't matter.
And finally, some things we really don't have time to talk about.
Jared and Ivanka partying at the new US embassy in Jerusalem while Israeli soldiers killed 62 Palestinian protesters in Gaza and injured thousands more.
Trump demanding an investigation into his campaign.
Michael Cohen accepting millions of dollars from organisations looking for insight into the Trump administration.
Revelations that Don Jr. attended another secret meeting before the election, this time with representatives of Israel, Saudi Arabia and the UAE who are offering to help Trump win the election.
Trump pestering the Postmaster General to double the postal rates charged to Amazon, presumably just to piss off Jeff Bezos.
I love that one. Trump pulling out of the summit with Kim Jong-un after North Korea called Mike Pence stupid.
Trump picking daytime TV pseudoscience peddling quack Dr. Oz to serve on the Presidential Council for Sports, Fitness and Nutrition.
Yet another school shooting, which Republicans have blamed on abortions, Ritalin, schools having too many doors, teachers not guessing the shooter would do this, despite the fact he wore a trench coat to school sometimes. It's not guns, though. Definitely not guns.
Definitely not guns, no. So, That's all the bad arguments and faulty reasoning we have time for this episode. If you hear Trump say something stupid and wonder if it's a fallacy, email us on fallaciostrump@gmail.com or find us on Twitter @FallaciousTrump.
And if you think we've used a fallacy ourselves, let us know.
And if you've had a good time, please give us a review on iTunes or support the show on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ftrump, where you can get some exclusive content and other cool stuff.
All music was by The Outburst and was used with permission. So until next time on Fallacious Trump, we'll leave the last word to the Donald.
That's right, go home to mommy. Bye. Bye!
Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good, all 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is Taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live, must start and file in app by 2/18.